When the news began to break yesterday about exactly where the $3.6 billion in military funding was coming from to pay for the Trump border wall, freshman Democratic Congressman Jason Crow of Colorado was on a bipartisan delegation trip to the southern border with Republican Representative Don Bacon of Nebraska. They were right there at the border. They are both members of the Armed Services Committee, which has original jurisdiction over that money that is now being diverted to the Trump wall. Congressman Crow served in combat in Iraq. He also served in combat in Afghanistan, where he was a member of the elite Army Rangers, our military's original Special Forces unit. It was his service in Iraq that informed his decision this summer to support an impeachment inquiry. In a Medium post he wrote, announcing his decision on impeachment, he told the story of patrolling the streets of Baghdad when an Iraqi man approached him with a problem that should have been settled in court. But the man told Jason Crow that there was so much corruption in Iraq, he said, justice is hard to find. Jason Crow said he is hearing that same kind of thing now in the United States. He wrote, I recognize that the values I fought for overseas were now under assault at home. I didn't run for office because I disliked Donald Trump. I ran because I love our country. And he ran in a Colorado district last year that has never elected a Democrat. In his statement supporting an impeachment inquiry, Congressman Crow wrote, during my tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, I saw what happens when government officials are above the law. When Democrats campaign in previously Republican districts in the West, they usually don't like to talk about the gun problem in this country. But Jason Crow ran as a Democrat who supports banning the sale of assault weapons.
You know, I look at the gun violence crisis and how it's torn apart so many families. Enough is enough. These are the weapons that I needed when I was fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan. And now they're tearing our communities apart. When my 4-year-old daughter comes home from school and tells us about the bad guy drills that she has and how she had to hide in a dark closet and be quiet in case a bad guy ever came to their school, I've had enough of this.
In tonight's episode of Meet the Freshman, you will meet Congressman Jason Crow. He will tell us what the people in our government working at the southern border told him yesterday and today about what they need to secure our southern border. We'll get the results of his informal poll of border officials on the question of to build or not to build the Trump wall. That's next. And for tonight's episode of Meet the Freshman, we are joined now by the 40-year-old freshman, Democratic Congressman Jason Crow of Colorado. Thank you very much for joining us tonight, Congressman. Really appreciate it.
Good to be on, Lawrence. Thank you.
You were down at the southern border just as this news was breaking on the $3.6 billion that's being diverted from the jurisdiction of your committee, the Armed Services Committee, to fund the border wall. What did you hear at the border from the people working there about what they need at the border?
So every location we visited, I asked one simple question because I didn't want to guide the answer in any particular direction. I just said, what is your greatest need from Washington? What can we give you to help you get this job done and accomplish your mission on the border? And every single person gave me the same answer. They said, we need more personnel. They didn't say a wall. In fact, one agent that I was talking to said, you know, it doesn't matter what we build. We could put a fence, a wall, slats, barricades. They always find a way over, under, or through it. But what we need is more personnel, more agents. So that just illustrated to me that, you know, the president's drive for this wall is a political decision. You know, he's driving this based on his politics and his need to show strength or to, you know, keep a campaign promise, whatever it happens to be. But this is not what the folks are saying, certainly to me, is their number one priority.
It sounds like the kind of question that if a member of Congress found you in Iraq or when you were serving in Afghanistan, that a wise member of Congress would have asked you, what do you need? Is that where that kind of question comes from for you?
Well, what I like to do when I do these visits, these congressional oversight visits, I just want to get information. You know, my job is to get information, to assess that information, and to make good policy. You know, it's not to drive politics into any of these situations. You know, that's not my background. You know, I grew up in a a family of small business owners and construction workers. I worked in construction to put my way through college. I became an Army Ranger. You know, my job was about getting things done for my community and for people, not about politicizing issues. So I always want to try to get the best information possible, and that's certainly my background.
I want to go to your decision this summer to come out in support of an impeachment inquiry. Tell us how you got there.
Yeah, you know, I wanted to assess all the information. I wanted to wait to see what the Mueller report contained in it. I read the whole report, was shocked by its contents. I still am shocked by its contents. I wanted to hear what Robert Mueller had to say, some of the other testimony. Ultimately, at the end of the day, this was about rule of law. This was about my experience, as you mentioned earlier, in Iraq and Afghanistan, and seeing firsthand what happens in a society when people don't trust government anymore, when rule of law and order and process breaks down. And I started to see some indications of that. You know, early on in my campaign, you know, I was talking to some folks out on the campaign trail, and you know, several of them said, you know, listen, it doesn't really matter what you tell me, and you seem like a really nice guy, but I just don't believe that this system works for me, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. And that really shook me. I mean, that shook me to the core to hear people saying that type of apathy and resignation. And I wanted to do something about it. And that's why I said recently that, you know, we have to conduct an inquiry. Congress has to assert itself in this process and maintain checks and balances. And if we're not able to do that now, then when?
Congressman, what has your constituents' reaction been to this? Because, as we've said, you stressed that you're the first Democrat to represent this district, and here you are in your first year saying you want to have an impeachment inquiry of a Republican president.
Well, I walk people through my thought process on this. I get out in my community a lot. You know, I hold town halls and coffees on the corner, round tables all the time. You know, over the last month, we were here on our district work period. I probably did 30 or 40 public events out in the community. I meet with anybody and everybody. I take their questions, and I walk them through my thought process. And I think that's a lesson for other folks is, you know, don't hide from those interactions. And even if people don't agree with you necessarily, if you show up, if you're willing to have the conversation with them, talk through the issue, keep an open mind, listen to what they have to say, be respectful of them, you know, more often than not, they'll be okay with the way you come out. Because I always remind my constituents that the promise is not agreement 100% of the time. You know, if an elected official comes up and says, you know, you're going to agree with me 100% of the time, they're not telling you the truth. The promise is about, you know, making sure you're transparent and open with folks.
Congressman Jason Crow gets tonight's last word. Thank you very much for joining us, Congressman, and please come back. Really good to have you here. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.